This is episode 62, titled, Why Does God Allow Bad Things to Happen to Good People? As always, my friend Stu is with us. Say hey, Stu.
Hey, Stu.
And this is Todd Sherman. We're glad that you're with us on Truth Wins podcast. Today we're going to be tackling a tough one because doesn't matter what you experience in life for very long. There's some things you look around and you're like, that was a really bad thing that happened to those good people or those innocent people. Why would a loving God allow something like that? In fact, we've had something here in Colorado in the last couple of weeks that we're going to be talking about that a lot of people are asking that right now. Why would God allow that? And the timing of that. So I think this has always been a hot button for people from day one, but especially more and more as we have more of what I would call an entitled culture. That we deserve all these things as humans, and that my kids deserve this and I deserve this. This is a tough one. It's like, why would a loving God allow the mess that's out there and all the evil that you see day in and day out? And so we want to tackle this hard topic, not that we can put a bow on it by the end of it and you feel all great, but at least get you to consider some things when tackling this in your own minds.
And one of the things you said in that question, why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? There was somebody who wrote a book, I think, back a ways, who was kind of a liberal theologian, and he wrote a book called that. But you start to realize one of the things, if you're going to be at all honest with yourself, you think back to your life. Are there times when you have done things that maybe you deserve punishment, but you didn't get it? You got away with doing something bad, you thought. And it turns out that you start to realize, if you're honest about your own life and your own thoughts, you realize there's really no such thing as good people. Yeah. People aren't basically good. And that's one of the flaws in that worldview, is that, you know, some people say people are basically good. Well, yeah, really? Leave your wallet out on the counter outside. Yeah. See how that goes for you.
Well, it's a subjective term, good, right, because you're comparing it to others. So each person gets to decide, well, there's the line, because there has to be a line when you go from good to bad. Right. Like Hitler, Stalin, they're in the bad category. But who else is in the bad category, and when do we start getting in the good? Well, this guy, he's my neighbor. He's kind of a schmuck. Seems a little selfish, but I'd still call him a good guy. Well, maybe somebody else in his life would say, no, he's in the bad category. So then you say, all right, well, how do we define good and bad? And Jesus said that too. When people come to him on at least one occasion, if not a few, he's like, well, let's back up a bit. Why do you call me good? There's only one who is good, right, and that is God. Right. And God alone is good all the time. And so the rest of us are in the same boat. We all sin and fall short of his glory. So what do we do with this world that we live in when we're all in the same boat of a bunch of messed up people? And not only do the people in the boat hurt each other, but sometimes the boat you're in starts sinking and you're like, why would God allow that? So we're going to tackle that. Let's talk about the suffering first. Let's start with, there's different types of suffering. So when we talk about bad things happening, there's different categories of bad things. One of them is just a consequence of evil. Somebody does an evil thing, murders somebody else. Right. That's a consequence. That's a kind of bad thing in its own. So, like, again, Stalin, Hitler, anybody who's a rapist, murderer,
genocidal maniac. Yeah.
They hurt others and they do something evil, and that's a consequence of it. What's another one?
Well, you start to sometimes figure out there's types of foolishness that you get a payback for. Like you talk about a thing called the Darwin Awards. One of my favorite ones that my students showed me was this guy got a JATO, jet assisted takeoff. You know, like if you're on a aircraft carrier, you only have so much distance to get up to flying speed. You have to really hit the mark. So they have this thing on a plane, and it just incredible power all of a sudden at once, and it just accelerates you incredibly. Well, this wise person apparently figured out that he was gonna put a JATO on top of his station wagon, and he was gonna
How did he get his hands on a JATO is what I'm wondering.
Well, you know how people are. They can get their hands on almost anything. Yeah. And so he attaches this to the top of his car, and actually they only put this together over time, it took him a while to figure out what had happened with this guy, because there wasn't much left of him except his teeth. And
goodness.
He accelerated to 80 miles an hour, flipped the JADO switch. Apparently his tires exploded. He took off, and they found, this kind of explosive burn mark in the side of this cliff and his teeth. And that was all that was left the.
Oh,
yes,
wow.
So.
Yeah, I remember when I was in youth ministry, the kids reading me stories out of the Darwin Awards, and it's like you can't help but laugh, but you feel bad.
Yes.
I mean, that person's dead now, but they were not too smart, and there's a book called, it's on the Grand Canyon deaths too, and just people being knuckleheads. Hey, get a picture of me doing this, and they slip and they're dead.
Yeah.
And it's story after story, and I mean, I'm surprised. I think we joked in my family that my angels retired long ago. Or they had to get a fill in because, I remember jumping bikes, and, we would jump, we'd come as fast as we could and hit this thing as hard as we could, and we'd land right on the bar. And I'm surprised I have 3 kids now, because you'd be like, you can't breathe for like 2 minutes. And then you shake the dust off, you're like, all right, let's do it again. We're like trying to kill ourselves.
After your testicles had descended again.
Yes. You just said testicles.
I did.
I don't know if we've ever said that word.
There's a Greek philosopher, Testicles. He was. Sorry. Okay, we're turning into junior high boys.
Exactly. Here. Speaking of Darwin Awards, we're just all right. Yes. Sorry, people. Okay, so I haven't heard that. That's a good one. Testicles. Consequences of evil. Consequences of just being knucklehead / foolishness. Diseases. Diseases is one. Like that's a tough one. See a good person go through cancer.
Right.
You've had that.
Yep. My first wife had cancer, and she was given a year to live, and she ended up living 5 years because of this therapy they used with her. But you saw how painful it was when she had to go to do chemo and radiation and just things they would try to do to stop the spread of this disease. But then you start to realize, we tried everything, and eventually there's going to come a time where nothing works.
Yeah.
And by then she was ready to go to be with Jesus. And that's, to me, the kind of hope piece that you have, that what is coming after this life with Christianity that makes it worthwhile.
Yeah. Yeah, but the thing I say a lot, the death rate's still holding strong at 100%. None of us can avoid it, but how we get there and how soon, how quickly, that's when we really wrestle. A young kid, the next, disease is always tough. Freak accidents, to see a child hit by a car, things like that, it just devastates us. And everybody, I think, has had those moments where they've heard of just a story of an innocent child losing his or her life and saying, why, God? Why would you allow that?
Right. And, we talk about freak accidents as if they're never going to happen. But we know from reality that when you drop your toast, it's going to land on the buttered side, on the floor.
Murphy's Law.
It's almost always going to fall so as to do maximal damage. And everybody's had those days where nothing's going right, and it seems like you've almost created this picture in your head that I can't get out of this tailspin. And it's, when you look around, you start to question, why is this? Why is this happening?
Yeah. Natural disasters is a tough one too, and we just had one here, somewhat natural, in Colorado, right in your backyard, literally.
Literally, yes. The Louisville Superior, the Marshall Fire, they called it. I have a house in Louisville, and it came within about 3 blocks of my house. Other houses burned, and my house didn't. And then sometimes you question, how did my house survive and these other houses didn't?
Or you'll see the footage of a whole neighborhood gone except one house right in the middle.
Right.
What's going on with that?
Yeah. And sometimes there's no answer to it. We don't know why. Because of the winds changing suddenly, or because of this happening.
Well, I think it was a perfect storm in that in Colorado, we hadn't seen snow for like 250 days or something. Incredibly dry, not much rain all fall. So Boulder County too has a you don't cut the grass policy in the fields to the west of you guys in there. So you have all this dead grass that's long. The fire starts, however it started. They're still trying to figure it out, I think. But it was incredibly windy, like gusts up to 100 miles per hour.
Right.
And we were over there. My wife and I were over there. We were going to do a little, because this was right around New Year's Eve. It was the day before.
Yeah,
it was the 30th or something.
December 30th.
So we're over there. We're going to just do like a staycation, but we got out of Dodge because we went up on top of the hill and you saw the fire blowing from one rooftop to the other there. And then here's the thing that gets people, at least here in Colorado, who know it. 24 hours later, we had our first snow in 250 days, big old wet snow, put out the fires. Yeah. Why couldn't have God brought that a day or two before? And this wouldn't have happened. Why did God just seem to be distracted or didn't care and allowed this to happen? Is a burning question a lot of people have.
Right. And that's a question that we don't necessarily have an answer to in terms of, I don't know why. There are things we don't know. And we also have things that we forget about natural disasters sometimes, like hurricanes. They actually perform beneficial things too. They bring aerosols in the air and from, one specific place to another, and they actually create chances for new life to grow. It's like sometimes if you look after a fire, you see that fires are an essential element too. When you got too much heavily thick wooded areas, sunlight's not getting to the plants at the bottom, and it opens it back up and new life can grow out. So, I'm not trying to make this light because it wasn't light when I was waiting the next day to see if I still had a house there in Louisville.
Yeah. And there were a few lives lost. On the one side, you're thankful that there were only a couple, but for those families and friends those 2 people who lost their lives or 3 people, that's devastating.